Your life if you spend your 20s on social media instead of skills. We were 22 years old, same college, same major, same tiny dorm room. Every night after class, I opened Instagram. He opened a laptop and started learning to code. We're Trajeshji now. He just turned down a $140,000 job offer because he already had a better one. I'm still figuring out what I'm good at. Same 4 hours, every night, for 8 years. That's not a story about talent. That's not a story about luck. That's a story about what you do between 8 p.m. and midnight, and how it quietly decides who you become. Here's what those 8 years actually cost me, and what I did about it. 2 people, 1 room, 1 choice. We were 22 years old, same college, same major, same tiny dorm room with 1 window that barely opened and a mini fridge we split the cost on. By every measure that mattered, we were identical. Same starting line, same amount of money in our bank accounts, which was almost nothing. Same amount of time in our days, which was everything. But here's the thing about being 22 that nobody warns you about. Every day, sometime around 8 o'clock at night after class, after dinner, after whatever you get handed a few free hours, just sitting there, yours to do whatever you want with. And every single night, without thinking about it, without making any kind of conscious decision, we chose differently. I picked up my phone. He picked up a skill. Not dramatically. Not with some big announcement. He didn't say, I'm going to change my life now. He just opened a laptop, watched a tutorial, wrote some code that didn't work, then wrote it again until it did. And I scrolled, liked things, watched people I didn't know, live lives I couldn't stop looking at. Neither one of us thought we were making a choice that mattered. That's the part that gets me. Even now, it never felt like a decision. It just felt like a Tuesday night. But Tuesday nights have a way of adding up. And 8 years of them? That's a completely different life. 4 hours a day? Doesn't feel like anything. Here's what nobody tells you about losing time. It doesn't feel like losing anything. It doesn't arrive as one big moment where you look up and think, well, there went 4 hours. It arrives as 20 minutes in the morning before you're fully awake. 45 minutes at lunch because you're eating alone anyway. A quick check after dinner that turns into an hour you can't explain. And then that last scroll before sleep, the one that's supposed to be 5 minutes, but somehow owns the entire night. That's how it happens. Not in one dramatic collapse. In fractions. Every single day. So small you never feel the weight of any individual piece. But I did the math once. And I wish I hadn't. 4 hours a day. Times 365 days a year. That's 1,460 hours. Every year. Over 8 years? 11,680 hours. Let that number sit for a second. Malcolm Gladwell wrote that it takes roughly 10,000 hours to become world-class at something. I had 11,680 hours, and I used them to watch other people, build things, travel places, and become someone worth watching. Meanwhile, my roommate was quietly crossing hour 500, then hour 1,000, then 2,000. Not because he was disciplined in some superhuman way, not because he didn't have bad nights or wasted weekends, but because his default, that thing you do without thinking, when the day is over and the room is quiet, his default was building something. Mine was consuming everything. And the brutal truth about defaults? You don't notice them while they're running. You only see what they built, or what they didn't, years later. And for me, that moment of seeing came at 30. In a conference room, during a meeting I thought was just another meeting. This wasn't laziness. Your brain was being played. Before we go any further, I need to say something important. Because if you're sitting there right now, feeling like this is a story about discipline, about willpower, about how some people have it and some people don't, it's not. What I had on my phone wasn't just an app. It was the output of thousands of engineers, designers, and behavioral psychologists, some of the most brilliant minds on the planet, whose entire job was to make sure I never put it down. The infinite scroll that never ends. The notification that arrives exactly when you're about to stop. The autoplay that removes the one moment of friction that might have made you pause and ask, wait, do I actually want to keep watching? None of that is accidental. Every single feature was tested, measured, and optimized to keep your thumb moving and your brain just stimulated enough to stay, but never satisfied enough to feel full. It's not a slot machine by accident. It's a slot machine by design. And here's what makes it different from every other distraction that ever existed. Previous generations had TV. They had video games. They had plenty of ways to waste an evening. But those had endings. A show ended. A game had a final level. There was a natural stopping point your brain could recognize. What we were handed had no ending. No final level. No credits rolling. Just an infinite, perfectly personalized stream of content engineered to feel important, while adding up to nothing. So no, this is not a story about you being weak. This is a story about walking into the most sophisticated attention trap ever built without anyone handing you a map. The trap was real. And so is the way out. But first, let me show you exactly what those 8 years cost. Not just in dollars, in something that hurts more than dollars. The real price tag. And it's not what you think. Let's talk about the number everyone fixates on first. By 30, my roommate was making $140,000 a year. I was making $54,000. That gap, $86,000, is real. And it's significant. But if I'm being honest with you, the money wasn't even the part that kept me up at night. Because money has a repair timeline. You can close an income gap. It takes time. It takes work. But there's a path. What's harder to repair? What I didn't even have language for until much later was everything else the gap was made of. There was the confidence gap. My roommate walked into rooms knowing exactly what he was worth. He didn't wonder if he deserved a seat at the table. He'd built something real with his own hands, over thousands of hours. That kind of confidence doesn't come from a salary. It comes from evidence. And he had 11,000 hours of evidence. I was still guessing. There was the options gap. Skills don't just pay better. They give you choice. Which company, which city, which kind of work, which problems you spend your life solving. Without them, you don't choose your opportunities. You accept whatever gets offered. And then there was the one nobody talks about. The one I think about the most. The identity gap. At 30, someone asked me at a dinner party, "So what are you really good at?" And I paused longer than I should have. Not because I was modest, because I genuinely didn't know. 8 years of consuming other people's expertise. And I couldn't point to a single thing I had built, learned deeply, or mastered completely. That pause, that 3-second hesitation, that was the real cost of 11,680 hours. Not a number on a paycheck, a blank space where an answer should have been. But here's where the story changes. Because 30 is not the end. It's just the moment you finally see clearly enough to start. The meeting that changed everything. It happened on a Tuesday, which felt appropriate because that's where all of this started. A Tuesday night. 8 years ago. A phone and a laptop, pointed in 2 different directions. I was in a conference room. 12 people around a table. Quarterly review. The kind of meeting you go to, because your calendar says you have to. And then my roommate walked in. Not as a guest, not as a peer sitting across from me. He walked in as the person running the meeting. He pulled up a dashboard I didn't understand. Started talking about data models, infrastructure decisions, towards systems he'd built that were now used by half the company. People were nodding, taking notes, asking him questions, and writing down his answers. I sat there with my notebook and wrote down nothing. Not because the meeting wasn't important, because somewhere in the middle of it, I stopped hearing what he was saying, and started hearing something else entirely. The distance between us. Not in the room. We were 3 chairs apart. But in every other way that actually counted. The skills we carried. The problems we could solve. The value we added just by showing up. We were not 3 chairs apart. We were 11,000 hours apart. And the strangest part of that moment, no one in that room knew our history. No one knew we'd shared a mini fridge at 22. No one knew we'd had exactly the same Tuesday nights. For 4 years straight. They just saw 2 people. One who knew exactly what he was doing. And one who was still figuring it out. I drove home that night in complete silence. Not angry. Not bitter. Just. Finally seeing something clearly. That had been blurry for a very long time. And here's the thing about seeing clearly. It hurts. But it's also the only thing that actually helps. The hidden advantage nobody talks about. Here's what the internet won't tell you. Because it's not as shareable as a success story. It's not as clean as a before and after photo. But it might be the most important thing in this entire video. Starting at 30 is not just a slower version of starting at 22. It is a fundamentally different experience. And in some ways, the ways that actually determine outcomes, it's a better one. At 22, you learn skills in a vacuum. You don't know which problems are worth solving. You don't know which industries actually pay. You don't know what kind of work drains you, versus what kind of work makes time disappear. You're building a toolkit without knowing what you'll ever need to build. At 30, you know exactly where the gaps are. You've sat in enough meetings to know which skills command respect in a room. You've watched enough colleagues get promoted to understand what actually separates them from everyone else. You've lived inside industries, organizations, and teams long enough to see which problems nobody knows how to solve, and what it would mean to be the person who could. That's not a small thing. That's a massive advantage. And there's something else. Your income at 30 is higher than it was at 22, which means you can invest in better courses, better mentors, better tools. The person teaching themselves to code on YouTube at 22 is working with the same resources as everyone else. The person at 30 with a real income can pay for the fast-track the cohort, the coach, the community, and compress 5 years of fumbling into 18 months of focused, targeted skill building. The cost of starting late is real, but so is the compound interest of clarity. And at 30, you have something the 22-year-old doesn't. You know exactly what you're building toward. So what does actually moving look like? Not in theory. Not in a motivational poster. On a real Tuesday night, with a real phone in your hand, let me show you exactly. Not willpower. Environment. Let me tell you what doesn't work first. Deciding you're going to be more disciplined. Telling yourself this time is different. Setting a screen time limit on your phone that you override with one tap every single morning. I tried all of it. And every time without fail, by day 4 or 5, the default won. Because defaults always win. Against willpower. Always. That's not a character flaw. That's just how the human brain is wired. Willpower is a resource. It depletes. And by 8 o'clock at night, after a full day of work, decisions, conversations, and everything else life asks of you, your willpower tank is sitting somewhere near empty. That's exactly when the phone is heaviest. That's exactly when the scroll feels most effortless. Not because you're weak, because you're tired. And tired people take the path of least resistance. Every single time. So, the answer isn't more discipline. The answer is changing what the path of least resistance leads to. Here's what that actually looked like for me. The phone left the bedroom. Not reduced. Not limited. Physically not in the room where I did my best thinking. Out of sight isn't just out of mind. It's out of the automatic reach that happens before your brain even registers what your hand is doing. The first 90 minutes of my morning became untouchable. No notifications. No email. No news. Just one skill. One resource. One direction. Before the world had a chance to fill my head with everyone else's priorities. I gave 90 minutes to my own. And then, the most important shift of all, I stopped trying to resist the phone with willpower. I started replacing it with something easier to reach. A book on my nightstand instead of a charger. A coding environment already open on my laptop. So the barrier to starting was lower than the barrier to scrolling. Friction in the wrong direction. Ease in the right one. Because here's the math that actually matters. I didn't need 4 hours a day. I needed 90 minutes. 90 minutes a day. 365 days a year. That's 547 hours. 2 years of that, 1,094 hours. Enough to go from zero to genuinely skilled in almost any field worth entering. Not 11,000 hours. Not a decade. 90 minutes. Starting tonight. That's the whole plan. But I want to show you what 5 years of that looks like. Because the numbers are going to surprise you. 5 years later. Same room. Different people. We ran into each other at an industry event. 5 years after that conference room Tuesday. He looked exactly the same, which somehow made it worse, and better at the same time. We got drinks. Caught up, the way people do, when they've shared a chapter of their lives, and then lived completely different sequels. He talked about his work. A technical lead role now. Team of 12. Problems worth solving. The kind of career that compounds every year building on the credibility of the year before. And then he asked about me. And here's what was different about this time. I didn't pause. I talked about the skill I'd spent 3 years building. The freelance work that had turned into a real income stream. The full-time role I just accepted, not because I needed it, but because the problem they were working on was one I actually wanted to solve. I talked about it the way he used to talk about his work. With the quiet confidence of someone who knows exactly what they're worth. Not because someone told them, but because they built the evidence themselves. Was I where he was? No. He had a 12-year head start measured in hours. I had 5 years of 90-minute mornings. The gap was still real. I won't pretend otherwise. But here's what had changed completely. The gap had a direction now. Before, it was just distance. Undefined. Demoralizing. The kind of distance that makes you feel like you're standing still while the world moves without you. Now it was a measurable distance between 2 points. With a clear path, a real speed, and an arrival time. I could actually calculate that is not nothing. That is the difference between lost and behind. Lost has no map. Lost has no movement. Lost sits at a kitchen table at midnight, wondering how it got this far. Behind is a position on a path. Behind is temporary. Behind is just what early looks like, when you're still in the middle of it. And that brings me to tonight, to you, to the question that actually matters. The only one worth asking before you close this video. The truth about starting late. Here's the truth. No softening. No motivational poster wrapped around it. You will not have what you would have had if you'd started at 22. Those 11,680 hours are gone. That's a real number, attached to a real cost, and you are allowed to sit with that for a moment, to feel the weight of it, to acknowledge it honestly, without pretending it doesn't exist, and without letting it become the reason you do nothing. Because here's the other side of that truth, the side that took me years to fully believe. The person who builds skills, starting at 30, understands something. The person who started at 22 may never fully grasp. It's not automatic, it's not inherited. It's not something that happens to you, because you were in the right place, at the right time, with the right roommate. It is a choice, made deliberately, under the specific pressure of knowing exactly what it cost you not to choose sooner. And that pressure? That is not a handicap. That is fuel. The two-year-old learning to code doesn't feel the weight of what they're building. They're just exploring, dabbling, seeing what sticks. You feel every single hour. You know exactly what each 90-minute morning is worth because you've done the math on what 11,680 hours of not doing it produced. That awareness doesn't slow you down. It makes you the most dangerous kind of learner, the kind who shows up every single day, not because it's fun, though sometimes it is, but because they've seen the alternative, and they've decided the alternative is no longer acceptable. Fewer wasted hours, fewer wrong directions, less romantic about it, more functional, less susceptible to shiny objects, more committed to boring, daily, unglamorous progress. That's not a slower version of the person who started at 22. That is a completely different kind of builder. And that builder, the one forged in clarity and cost, makes fewer catastrophic mistakes over a decade than the enthusiastic beginner who never had to feel what was at stake. You figured it out late, and you're doing it anyway. Both things are true, and both things matter. The only question that matters tonight. I want to talk to you directly now. Not the version of you at 35, with a new skill set and a clear career trajectory. Not the version of you at 40, who closes an income gap 8 years in the making. The version of you, sitting here tonight, with a phone somewhere within arm's reach, with a Tuesday night that belongs entirely to you, and a few free hours that are about to be decided. There are two versions of how tonight ends. The first version. You feel this, the way I think you're feeling it right now. The weight of it lands. The math makes sense. The conference room moment hits a little too close to home. And then the video ends. And the phone fills the silence the way it always does. And tomorrow morning you wake up, and the feeling has faded the way feelings do. And you tell yourself, you'll start this weekend. When things settle down. When you have a clearer plan. When the timing feels a little more right, and the timing never feels more right. And the Tuesday nights keep passing. And at 35 you are not in a conference room, watching someone who shared your mini fridge at 22 run a meeting you don't fully understand. You're in a different conference, a different version of the same moment, sitting just a little further back from the table, wondering, again, how it got this far. That version exists. I lived a piece of it. I know exactly what it feels like. It doesn't feel like failure. That's the hardest part. It just feels like Tuesday. The second version. You close this video. You put the phone across the room. Not in a drawer. Not deleted. Just across the room. Far enough that reaching for it is a decision, not a reflex. You open a laptop, or a notebook, or a browser tab pointed somewhere, that builds something instead of consuming everything. You don't commit to a 5-year plan tonight. You don't overhaul your entire life. You just give 90 minutes to something real. Not because 90 minutes changes everything, but because the person who gives 90 minutes tonight is slightly more likely to give 90 minutes tomorrow. And the person who gives 90 minutes tomorrow is a different person than the one who didn't. And that difference, invisible tonight, barely visible next month, is everything. By year 3, because here's the only thing you actually need to understand before you close this tab. 22 is gone. You can't have it back. But tonight is the youngest you will ever be again. So is tomorrow morning. So is every 8 p.m. for the rest of your life. The skill doesn't ask how old you are. It doesn't ask how many Tuesday nights you missed. It doesn't check your resume, or your starting point, or the number of hours you handed to an algorithm that never once had your best interests in mind. It just asks one question. Are you showing up tonight? You have spent enough Tuesday nights not showing up. This one is a different decision. Make it.